The preserves were still warm. That was the thing that got me. I had been up since 4:15 that Saturday morning, standing over my stove on Linden Avenue in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and hot sugar and the particular sharpness of apple cider vinegar, finishing the last batch of spiced pear chutney. 12 jars, sealed and labeled by hand. I had loaded them into the insulated box along with 16 jars of blackberry jam, 9 jars of bread and butter pickles, and 4 jars of a tomato relish I'd been developing since August, testing the ratio of smoked paprika to brown sugar across 11 separate batches until it was right. I had driven 22 minutes to the Harwick Harvest Fair in the dark. I had paid the $45 vendor registration fee in September. And I was still sitting in the parking lot at 7:48 in the morning, engine running, watching my assigned table, space 14B row 2 prime Eastern Corridor, being set up by a woman I had never met. She was arranging candles. Soy candles in mason jars, which was fine, which was her right, except that she was arranging them on my table in my assigned space while my in-laws stood on either side of her like parentheses, pointing out where the display should face and which items should go in the front row. I turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment with my hands in my lap and the box of warm preserves on the passenger seat beside me. Then I got out of the car. My father-in-law, Gerald Osei, saw me coming first. He had the particular body language of a man bracing for a conversation he had already decided he would win. Shoulders back, chin up, the slight forward lean of someone who has rehearsed. Adiz. He used my full name. He only used my full name when he was about to explain something to me. We need to talk about the space. That's my table, Gerald. It was. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. But Crystal drove from Columbus. She's been trying to get a vendor spot at this fair for 2 years. When I heard there was a logistics issue with her assigned space. What logistics issue? Her spot was double booked. He said it smoothly. These things happen. We needed to make an accommodation and you were the most logical choice since you're local. My mother-in-law, Patricia, appeared at his elbow. She had a coffee in each hand and gave one to Gerald with the practiced ease of a woman who has been managing this man's social situations for 31 years. Ada, sweetheart. Patricia's voice was warm the way the lobby of an expensive hotel is warm, comfortable and completely impersonal. Crystal is family. You understand how that works. I paid $45 for that space in September, I said. We'll reimburse you. Gerald waved his hand slightly. The kind of wave that means the conversation is over. Take the back row. There are still spots available. I looked at the back row. It faced the service entrance. The foot traffic pattern at the Harwick Fair ran east to west, which meant the back row caught the tail end of whatever interest the front corridor didn't consume. I had studied the fair map for 40 minutes before submitting my registration. I had specifically chosen 14B because of the Eastern Corridor foot traffic. I had paid for 14B. That's not what I registered for, I said. Patricia touched my arm. We need someone who actually sells at the Eastern spots, Ada. Crystal has been doing craft markets for 6 years. You're still building your customer base. She smiled. It's not personal. It's just practical. I looked at Crystal, who was mercifully focused on her candle arrangement and not participating in this conversation. I looked at my table. I looked at Gerald. Hey, I said. I went back to my car. I drove around to the back row. I unloaded my box of warm preserves alone and set up in space 31C, which faced the service entrance and smelled like diesel from the generator 30 feet away. Before I tell you what happened between 7:50 and noon that Saturday, I want to ask you something. Has anyone ever told you that you weren't ready for something you'd already been doing? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Adiz Mensi. I am 31 years old. I make small batch preserves, jams, pickles and condiments under a label called Linden & Company, which I registered as a sole proprietorship 18 months ago after 3 years of selling informally out of my home. I do not have a storefront. I operate out of my licensed home kitchen on Linden Avenue in Harwick, Ohio, which cost me $340 to certify through the county health department and another $180 to renew annually. My wholesale jars come from a restaurant supply company in Cleveland at 67 cents each. My labels I design and print at home on craft paper stock. My ingredients I source from 2 farms, Bellamy Orchards in Geauga County and a small CSA operation run by a woman named Yatund Adeyemi 12 miles outside of Harwick. and from the Harwick Winter Farmers Market, where I have been a regular customer for 2 years. I gross between $800 and $1,400 per market event, depending on season and location. The Harwick Harvest Fair was my biggest single event of the calendar year. I had been preparing for it since July. Gerald and Patricia Osei had been dismissing what I did since approximately 3 months after I married their son, Kofi, 4 years ago. It started small, the kind of dismissal that doesn't announce itself. Patricia referring to my kitchen work as Ada's little cooking projects at family dinners. Gerald asking Kofi in front of me whether I had thought about getting a real job now that they were settled. The slow, consistent implication that what I built in my kitchen on Linden Avenue was temporary. A placeholder. Something I would grow out of once I understood what serious work looked like. Kofi absorbed these comments the way he absorbed most friction from his parents. With the patient, practiced neutrality of someone who learned early that the cost of disagreeing with Gerald Osei was higher than the cost of letting things go. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had been trained to manage his parents through strategic silence, and he had not yet understood that his silence was also a position. The first time Patricia called Linden and Company a hobby in front of company, I had looked at Kofi. He had looked at his plate. That was 2 years ago. I had said nothing then either. I was getting tired of the things I hadn't said. Space 31C was exactly as bad as I had expected. The generator noise was a low constant vibration that you felt more than heard, a kind of mechanical undertow beneath the fair sounds. The children, the PA announcements, the bluegrass trio set up near the main pavilion. The service entrance behind me opened every 20 minutes or so to receive deliveries, which meant a cold draft across my back each time. The smell of diesel layered over the cinnamon in my display, which was not nothing because smell was half the reason people stopped at a preserve table. I set up anyway. I put the blackberry jam at the front left because the deep purple read well at a distance. I stacked the pear chutney in the center, labels forward, and arranged the tomato relish along the right edge where the color contrast was strongest against the craft paper tablecloth. I put a small cutting board on the left corner with a jar of the bread and butter pickles open for tasting, and 3 small spoons and a handwritten card that said, "Try before you buy. Always." By 8:30 I had 2 customers. By 9 I had 6. None of them were people who had sought me out. They were people who had taken a wrong turn toward the service entrance and stopped because of the jam color or the open pickle jar or simple curiosity. But they stopped. And when they stopped they tasted something. And when they tasted something they bought. By 10:15 I had sold $94 in product. I was making change for a man who had bought 3 jars of tomato relish when I saw her for the first time. She was perhaps 65, with the upright posture of someone who had been a teacher or a principal or a person who ran things. She wore a burgundy wool coat despite the mild October morning and carried a canvas tote that was already heavy with market purchases. She stopped at my table with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "Who makes these?" she said. "I do." She picked up the pear chutney. She read the label. She read the ingredients list on the back. She set it down and picked up the tomato relish and read that too. "Hey, I." She gestured at the pickle jar. "Please." He tasted it. She stood there for a moment with the expression of someone running a quiet calculation. "How long have you been at this market?" she said. "This is my first harvest fair. I've been at the winter market on Clement Street for about a year and a half. Why are you in the back row?" I paused. "Accommodation issue." She looked at me with the specific patience of someone who has heard that phrase used to describe something it doesn't accurately describe. "I see," she said. She bought 2 jars of blackberry jam, 1 pear chutney and 2 tomato relish. $41. She put them in her canvas tote and walked away without telling me her name. This is the part of the story I need to tell you carefully because it is the part that did not involve me at all. I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know it was happening until it was already done. The Harwick Harvest Fair had a vendor recognition ceremony at noon. It was brief, 10 minutes at the main pavilion stage, run by the fair's organizing board, where they thanked sponsors and recognized vendors who had shown growth or community contribution over the year. I had attended it as a customer the previous 2 years. I knew it existed. I had not expected to be part of it. At 11:45 I was packing empty jars into my box. I had sold through most of my blackberry jam and all 4 tomato relish jars by 11:30, which was a number I had not projected, when a man from the fair board named Thomas Aqua came to find me in Space 31C. He was slightly out of breath as if he had been walking fast. "Ms. Mensose," he said. "Yes. Are you the vendor for Linden and Company?" "I am." He looked at his clipboard. He looked at my space number. He looked at the fair map he was holding and then back at my space number. "Why are you in 31C?" he said. "Accommodation issue with my assigned space." He wrote something on his clipboard. His expression was the careful neutral of someone noting a discrepancy without assigning blame in the moment. "Mrs. Okonkwo asked me to find you," he said. The main pavilion smelled like fried dough and dry leaves and the particular sweetness of pressed apple cider from the orchard booth 3 rows over. The noon light was the flat gold of Ohio in October, low and long, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. Mrs. Okonkwo, whose full name I learned was Ngozi Okonkwo, who had been the founding director of the Harwick Small Business Development Center for 14 years before retiring, and who served on the Harvest Fair's vendor committee as a volunteer, was already at the stage when Thomas brought me over. Gerald and Patricia were in the audience. I saw them before they saw me. Patricia was holding her second coffee of the morning. Gerald had his arms crossed with the comfortable posture of a man who expects to be peripheral to whatever is about to happen. Mrs. Okonkwo took the microphone. She said the things that are said at these ceremonies. She thanked the board, she thanked the volunteers, she acknowledged the sponsors by name. And then she said, "Before we close, I want to speak about something I observed this morning that I think the Harwick vendor community should hear." The pavilion quieted. I discovered a vendor operating from Space 31C, the back row service entrance side, who had originally registered for Space 14B in the Eastern Corridor. When I asked why, I was told there had been an accommodation made for another vendor. She paused. "The vendor in 31C is Adiz Mensose of Linden and Company. She sold through 60% of her inventory by 11:30 from the back row. With generator noise and diesel smell and a foot traffic rate that frankly I would estimate at about 15% of the Eastern Corridor." She looked at the audience. "I want to say clearly," Mrs. Okonkwo continued, "that what I tasted at that table this morning is the best small batch tomato relish I have encountered at any market in this county in the last decade. And I want to say equally clearly that the Harwick Harvest Fair Vendor Committee will be reviewing its accommodation policies before the spring event." She handed the microphone back to Thomas Aqua. The applause was not dramatic. It was the steady, specific applause of a community affirming something it already knew but hadn't had occasion to say. I was standing at the edge of the pavilion with an empty insulated box and a cash envelope and the specific physical sensation of being seen by people who had been watching for longer than I knew. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I stood there and let it settle. Across the pavilion, Gerald had uncrossed his arms. Patricia was looking at her coffee. Kofi called me at 12:40 when I was loading the van. "My mother texted me," he said. "I know." She said Mrs. Okonkwo made an announcement. She did. Pause. The particular silence of a man arriving late to something that has already happened. "Ada," he said. "I should have." "I know," I said. "That's not enough. What I mean is." "Kofi." I closed the van door. The October air smelled like fallen leaves and someone's wood smoke from a chimney 2 streets over. "I know what you mean. I'd like to have that conversation at home. Not on the phone." He said. "Okay." I drove home. "I need to tell you something about Mrs. Ngozi Okonkwo that I learned in the weeks after the fair, because it matters to how I understand what she did." She had spent 14 years running the Harwick Small Business Development Center. In that role, she had worked with approximately 200 small business owners, helped them register, certify, find markets, access microloans, navigate the specific bureaucratic texture of starting something from nothing in a mid-sized Ohio city. She had seen what dismissal looked like. She had seen what accommodation looked like when it was actually displacement. She had a finely calibrated sense of the difference. She had been watching the vendor accommodation pattern at the Harvest Fair for 3 years. She had spoken to the board informally. She had been told it was being addressed. When she tasted my tomato relish at 11:15 and then walked to the Eastern Corridor and saw candles in Space 14B and asked Thomas Aqua whose registration that space held and Thomas told her, she made a decision in approximately 4 minutes. He did not ask me. He did not warn me. She did not offer me the option to decline. I've thought about that a lot since October. Whether I would have said yes if she'd asked. Whether I would have wanted her to. Whether it matters. What I keep coming back to is this. She saw something unfair and she used the platform she had to name it, and she did it because she could, not because I had asked her to or because she needed anything from me in return. That is not the same thing as rescue. It is something quieter and harder to name. It is a person deciding that the truth is worth saying even when no one has specifically requested it. I didn't earn it. I didn't plan for it. I just kept selling jam from the wrong table until someone with a microphone noticed. 3 things. If you want them. 1. The back row is not the end of the story. It is information. It tells you what someone thinks you're worth, which is different from what you're actually worth, and the difference between those two numbers is where the work happens. 2. The people who move you to the back row are counting on the back row to do the explaining for them. If you sell through 60% of your inventory from 31C by 11:30, you have just made their explanation incorrect. 3. There are people in every community who have been watching longer than you know. You cannot plan for them. You cannot earn them. You can only show up with your best work and leave the door open. Mrs. Okonkwo came into my kitchen on a Tuesday in November. I had been invited to pitch a wholesale arrangement to a specialty grocery called Elm and Larder that was opening in Harwick in the spring, and she had offered to consult on the pitch. She sat at my kitchen table while I finished labeling the fall batch of cranberry conserve, and she told me without being asked that she thought Linden & Company had the foundation for a real regional brand if I wanted that. She said it the way she said most things. Flatly, directly, as a statement of observed fact rather than encouragement. "Do you want that?" she said. I thought about it honestly. "I think so," I said. "I'm still figuring out how big I want it to be." "Fair answer." She picked up a jar of the tomato relish. "What's your current wholesale price on this?" We talked for 2 hours. She left with 4 jars and a list of 3 contacts at regional specialty grocery buyers she had known from her SBDC years. I stood in my kitchen after she left and looked at the labeled jars lined up on the counter. The deep red of the cranberry conserve, the amber of the pear chutney, the purple-black of the blackberry jam, and I thought about Gerald's hand wave. "Take the back row. These things happen. These things happen. They do. And then other things happen too." Elm and Larder placed an initial wholesale order of $1,200 in January. I am developing 3 new products for their spring opening. The Harwick Harvest Fair sent a revised vendor agreement in December with a new accommodation policy and a note from Thomas Aqua confirming my registration for Space 14B, Eastern Corridor, for next October. Kofi and I had the conversation I asked for. It was long and it was honest, and it is not finished, but it is happening, which is more than it was before. He has started coming to the winter market on Saturday mornings. He stands at the table and makes change while I manage the display, and we don't talk much while we're working, but sometimes between customers he picks up a jar and reads the label like he's reading it for the first time. Maybe he is. Mrs. Okonkwo texts me occasionally. Usually links to microgrant opportunities or regional market listings, or, once, a photograph of an empty jar of tomato relish with the caption, "Reorder?" I sent her 6 jars the next morning. Have you ever kept doing the work from the wrong table and discovered that the right people were watching anyway? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. I'm a D's. I make preserves on Linden Avenue. I am not a placeholder.